Hey guys, what's going on? Enders here. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to try, to the best of my ability, to outline what I would consider to be my personal perfect Battlefield game. A lot of you have requested this video quite a bit, and I'm going to try my best to outline it as detailed as possible, but I'm obviously going to have to omit, some very small details because the video will be, 4 hours long. So without further ado, let's jump into it. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button. It helps the channel out immensely. Thank you to anyone that does that. And subscribe to the channel. Join the Discord. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitch. I stream every single day. All links are in the description. So the first thing I want to talk about is, of course, the setting of the Battlefield game that I would consider to be my perfect Battlefield game. I think a Cold War Battlefield game would be really cool if executed properly, especially if you heavily lean into the sort of bleak aesthetic of things and you have the right factions and the right weapons and the right music and the right maps and the right everything. But I might even consider doing a little bit of a twist where it's the Cold War, but it actually turns into a war, right? That way it could open up much cooler map locations, like, for instance, the Kremlin in Russia. Maybe we take the war to them or something like that. I'm spitballing here, but you see where I'm going with this. And with the setting, of course, I'm going to loop in a bunch of other things into the setting category, like you have to have the right weapons for the era, no sort of flashy, weird, stupid voice lines. I doubt Russia in like the 1980s and 1990s would be saying the cringe bullshit we hear in Battlefield 2042. So guess what? That's not getting put in the game. If I were to put voice lines in my perfect Battlefield game, I would go with Battlefield 3 style voice lines where, they swear and they yell and it just sounds way better. And of course, the period-correct vehicles and airplanes and helicopters and all that sort of stuff. That all is encompassed by the Cold War setting. Now I want to switch gears slightly and talk about features that I would include in my Battlefield game. No-brainer, server browser, okay? You can check that off the list. DICE, if you're listening, you can use this video as a checklist for the next Battlefield game if you wish. So put a server browser in the game. I would make sure that the game has some sort of persistent server system. I would probably heavily tweak the portal system because I think there's some really bad inherent issues with the portal system, but I would still obviously put hosting servers in my Battlefield game. A personal request of mine would be a streamer mode so people can't stream snipe as easily, but obviously that doesn't affect 99.9% of people. It's just a little option that I think every other game in this category has already, but Battlefield doesn't. I would absolutely bring back end-of-round map voting, but I would increase it to 3 maps you can choose from as opposed to 2. If you remember in Battlefield 1, you could choose between 2 maps, but sometimes the maps would be like Galicia and some other abomination like Heligoland Bight. Then you just want to leave the server, so I think more options the better. I would reintroduce team switching and kit switching into this game. If you remember in previous Battlefield games, say a support player died and you're a medic. If you picked up his gun, it would switch your entire kit to support. I want to bring that back. I think it adds some interesting outplays to the game, and I think it just adds to the depth of gameplay in general. And then obviously no-brainer team switching. You haven't been able to switch teams in like the past, 2 Battlefield games, and that just sucks. So I don't like when developers take away freedom from the players. So I'm going to give that freedom back to the players in my Battlefield game. You can team switch, and who cares what people say about it? For those of you that are wondering, no, my Battlefield game would not be 128 players. I think 128 players is a complete and utter catastrophe, and they should never do it again. My Battlefield is going to be the traditional 64-player maximum, which will allow me to design much higher quality maps. And I could talk about all the features on my Battlefield game for literally over an hour, probably, but I'll include 2 extremely important things at the end of this, and I'll switch gears a little bit. So the last 2 things I want to talk about are I would absolutely include 4-man squads in my Battlefield game. I don't like 5-man squads because it always leaves an odd person out, and I've never understood why people want 5-man squads in a game that isn't divisible by 5 player count-wise. It just never made any sense to me. And one more thing with the squad system, I would reintroduce the squad perk system. So if you remember in Battlefield 3 and then later in Battlefield 4, you could have squad perks such as Squad Sprint or Squad Stealth, which made you, unspot faster, and Squad Suppression or Squad this and Squad that. There are a ton of things you could choose from, and I think that was an awesome way to differentiate your squad from other squads. You could really tailor your playstyle to what you wanted to do. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how I would go about designing the maps or choosing locations for maps. When I look at the maps that I enjoy in Battlefield games, they typically fall into two categories, I find. There are the super well-designed, more open but still terrain-heavy Battlefield maps that are vehicle-friendly. Then there are the more tightly designed close-quarter, urban/close-quarter maps, right? And those have vehicles on them as well, but perhaps only tanks or IFVs or something of the sort. And one thing I would really focus on is making sure that maps that don't have a heavy urban aspect to them have well-designed terrain. You cannot play a Battlefield game without well-designed terrain. There is a reason why Spearhead in Battlefield 2042 is considered by many to be the best map in Battlefield 2042, and that is because even in the more open areas, there are rocks to play behind. There are good hills that are designed for you to be able to peek one side and not be exposed on the other side. So you have to focus on terrain, you have to focus on the undulations of the map itself. And then for urban maps, I find urban maps that play the best have limited verticality access. So say there are 4 stories to a building. There, you can only access 2 of those stories, and the other 3 are just for sort of map decoration. I find when you design a map with, let's say, 10 stories that are all accessible and all those windows you can get shot from, I think it completely ruins the flow of the game, and you're just never going to be able to actually wipe people from those buildings in the first place. So if I were designing a heavy city map, or just a map with heavy urban fighting, I would definitely focus on verticality limitation, as well as I would focus very closely on the distances and the spacing of the buildings and cover and lanes and routes and all that sort of stuff. And the way you would limit verticality would be with out-of-bounds areas. So, you know when you walk out of bounds and it tells you, hey, you have 10 seconds to run back in bounds. I don't think Battlefield uses that enough in their games because people just tend to get in ridiculous locations because of the out-of-bounds lines. They're not properly set up. Now, moving on to the gunplay. The gunplay of my perfect Battlefield game would be an edited version of either Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4's gunplay system. That means it's going to be a burst firing based gunplay system, but it's not going to have suppression in the game. I think suppression really over exaggerates how bad some Battlefield gunplay is, especially Battlefield 1. And I think without suppression, people would see that BF3/BF4 burst style is definitely the best way to go because you can still full auto at a certain distance, but past, say, I don't know, 50 or 60 meters, maybe a little closer than that, you have to burst fire in order to maintain target accuracy. And as far as the recoil of my gunplay, I would definitely increase the recoil over from where it was in Battlefield 2042 currently. But the thing with recoil is you definitely have to be very careful with how heavy you make the recoil. People always complain that the recoil isn't high enough, but I don't think people understand that it would pretty much ruin the game for a lot of people if the recoil was like PUBG, for instance. Most people would absolutely not be able to even play the game at that point. So there's a fine line with recoil balance, in my opinion. You have to make it substantial-ish, but not too substantial. And 2 more things I'll throw in here for the gunplay and I guess weapon thing in general. I would make sure the audio of my weapons in my Battlefield game are beefy, scary sounding, and unique. So if you remember in Battlefield 3, if you shot the G3A3, you would know that that person has a G3A3. It had a very distinct sort of ka-chunk sound when you shot it. It could not be mistaken between an AEK or another weapon. And if you were using a sniper, I want that sniper to shake my headphones, okay? I think that is what made Battlefield 3 weapons sound so good, especially playing at high volume. I think they sound excellent, and I think the echo after you shoot it is quite important as well, just to establish that sort of, I don't know, immersive, atmospheric nature. And lastly, I would definitely not have visual recoil in my Battlefield game. Visual recoil is what Battlefield 1 had, and it fooled a lot of people into thinking Battlefield 1's recoil was crazy, but actually visual recoil was just lying to you the entire time, and the actual recoil of Battlefield 1 was incredibly insignificant. So that's a mechanic that I definitely disagree with. Now, switching gears to briefly touch on vehicles, I'm mostly an infantry player, but when vehicles are well designed and well implemented and have something to learn in them, I consider myself to be quite a versatile player. I like learning the vehicles, all vehicles, jets, helis, IFVs, tanks, and I would design my Battlefield games vehicles off of Battlefield 4's vehicles, but with slight tweaks. The reason I chose Battlefield 4's vehicles is because they are undoubtedly the most advanced and well-designed vehicles in the history of Battlefield, both in terms of mechanics and in terms of feel. I think there's a couple things you could tweak with maybe the helicopters, maybe some of the tanks, but in general, I don't want to touch them too much because I think Battlefield 4 got it fairly close to perfect with some minor balance adjustments here and there. And the last thing I will touch on in this video will be the movement of my quote-unquote perfect Battlefield game. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to combine a ton of different aspects from previous Battlefield games and even some aspects from Battlefield 2042. I expect this section of the video to get the most backlash because I think people, when it comes to movement, people have such vastly different opinions about what movement should be like in Battlefield. But, this is my Battlefield, so, I'm going to try to make it not only just for me, but I think what is generally considered to be some of the best aspects of Battlefield movement. And I will start with, I want crouch running back, okay? I do not want the ability to lay on your back, but I would like to see crouch running return because I believe that made stance transitions quite a bit smoother. You can't do that in 2042 right now. So when you go to run, you sort of have to stand up first and then, you get shot in the back. I would change that a bit just by adding crouch running back into the game. In terms of the speed of transition changes, right? So the speed at which you get up from prone to crouch and then crouch to standing, I would make sure they're quick, right? I don't like super long animations or anything like that. So I would say I would keep the same stance transitions from Battlefield 2042 or Battlefield 5. Both of those games were pretty snappy when it comes to that, and I think the gameplay felt pretty fine as a result when it comes to that aspect of the movement. In terms of 80-80 or strafe speed, I would make sure the strafe speed is an acceptable strafe speed for the setting and the gameplay speed of the game that I'm trying to make, right? In my opinion, it's a very slippery slope with this, because if you make it too fast, then it becomes Quake and people complain. But if you make it too slow, you can't peek corners and the game feels like trash. So the thing I would focus on most closely is the ADS strafe speed, okay? I would make sure that that is an acceptable speed so you can peek corners at a decent rate, but not too fast to where it's completely unreturnable. And I do think there was a happy medium there, to be sure. Now, in terms of jumping and sliding and all this sort of stuff, I definitely want to keep jump peeking in the game. That's an essential part of Battlefield that's been in the game for, a decade now. And it's an essential movement option for players to outplay and peek corners. Without it, the game gets way too campy and people don't move. And like I said, people might disagree with me on this, but I've played Battlefield games without jump peeking, such as Battlefield 1, and what happens is people just literally camp in buildings and don't move the entire time. You need to have aggressive movement options in order to keep the pace of the game, acceptable in my opinion. And the last two things I will talk about is tack sprint and sliding. So I want a single fucking sprint speed in my Battlefield game, okay? I don't want this bullshit that games are doing where it's a normal sprint speed, then you double tap to tack sprint. No. I want one constant acceptable sprint speed when I hit the fucking shift key, okay? So my game's we're gonna go back to old school, ladies and gentlemen. One sprint speed. And in terms of the slide, I would have Battlefield 5 slide, believe it or not, but I would remove the turn rate cap or at least lessen the turn rate cap because I think that felt pretty terrible to play sometimes when you slid and then you couldn't turn more than 5 degrees. But in order to make sure the slide isn't absolutely out of control, I would probably keep their slide spam filter that they had in Battlefield 5 still present. So when you use the slide, you sort of have to use it skillfully, and you have to choose when you want to use it. And I think that's all I really want to cover in this video. I left out a bunch of stuff, but I think this is a good sort of rough outline of what I would try to make my perfect Battlefield game be like. And I'm very interested to hear your comments, so definitely let me know what you think down below. And hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I stream every single day at twitch.tv/Enders, and I'm going to try to stream on YouTube here. I've been having a hell of a time trying to set up YouTube streaming because I really don't like how it is. But I'm still going to try to power through and make it work for the people that are interested. So if you are interested, turn on YouTube notifications or follow me on Twitter. Both of those will tell you when I go live, as well as joining the Discord. So thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.